If you are new to gardening in the PNW, this video is for you.
Hi, I'm Jolene with Sanctuary Gardens. I have gardened my entire life. I lived in California for a time. My father gardened and I helped him there. My family moved to Idaho and we had a market garden where we sold our produce at local markets. When my husband and I moved to Western Washington, it was a completely new climate I never gardened in before, and it definitely came with a lot of hiccups. Last year I completed my Master Gardener certification through Washington State University and learned so much more on how to garden in this local climate of mine. In today's video, I am sharing a lot of useful information that will help you in planning your garden, as well as my top 3 tips for having your successful PNW garden. Let's get started. First of all, let me define what I mean by PNW, Pacific Northwest. I am talking about very northern California along the coastline of Oregon and Washington and to southern BC. This doesn't apply to eastern Washington and eastern Oregon because those are vastly different climates than it is on the west of the Cascades. Some of the first things that you should know about gardening in our particular climate is that it is very much like a Mediterranean climate. We have very wet and cool winters with hot, dry summers. And when I say hot summers, I'm not talking about over 100 degrees, although we can get over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Our summers tend to range anywhere from 70 degrees up to 90 degrees throughout the summer months. It's important to also note that our summer nights are actually quite cool. So although we might spike up to 90, even 100 degrees during the day, most of our evenings are still down in the 50 degrees. I just looked at my weather for the next 10 days and my lowest that we get at night is 49 degrees and the highest I get is 59 degrees. So although our days are hot, our nights stay fairly cool. Cold winter temperatures range down to the teens and 20 degrees. We can get as low as in the single digits, though that doesn't usually last very long. And I have known in the middle of winter for us to get into the 40 degrees, even sometimes 50 degrees. So although the temperatures range very widely in the winter, we don't tend to get extremely cold for very long. This makes for really nice winter gardening, which is one of the tips I'll share later. Something else to note is that our springs are very long and cool and very wet. Winter is also very wet here in the PNW. In fact, in the Olympic Mountain Range, which is just up the way from me, it's considered a temperate rainforest because they get so much rainfall over there. And although I don't get quite as much rain in my particular area, I can still get like 40 plus inches of rain a year. So it's important to remember, especially with springtime, even if your last frost date passes and there's really very low risk of you getting a hard freeze, the springs are still very cool. And so your warm season crops, like your tomatoes and peppers, can take a really long time to get well established and to kind of take off because those springs are so cool and long. The USDA hardiness zones, which is the average low temps in a particular area, those range anywhere from 6 to 9 typically in the coastal PNW area. But definitely I highly recommend contact your local county extension, contact your master gardeners and find out more about your local region. Find out what your hardiness zones are, what your growing season is, the number of days between your first and last frost date so you know how long to plant things, and then know your first and last frost dates. All of this information is very helpful, and a quick search even on the Farmer's Almanac with your zip code can give you a lot of great information too. In the Pacific Northwest, we are very blessed that we have rich, beautiful soil. It's glacial soil, and so it creates really abundant gardens. Our soil tends to lean a little bit on the clay side. That is something to keep in mind. If you're going to fight anything, it's not going to be a sandy soil. It's probably going to be clay soil, even rocky soil. But that soil makes amazing gardens. And because we have nice warm springs and lots of rain in the winter, but mild winters, you can do a lot of gardening year round. There's lots of variety of things that you can grow, and oftentimes your soil doesn't need a ton of amendments to keep it fertile. Really, truly, gardening in the PNW is like a gardener's dream come true because there's so many wonderful things that make it fun and easy to garden in. That being said, there are some drawbacks and there are things that necessarily aren't bad, but you just need to know and be prepared about. And I wish I had known these things before and that someone had shared them with me so that I could avoid mistakes that I definitely made in my first few years gardening. And that's why I'm sharing this with you now, so you can hopefully avoid the mistakes I made. So my first tip is to prepare for wetness. I've said it before already, and I'm gonna say it again. Our winters and springs are very, very wet, and you have to prepare accordingly. In fact, my area, we get quite a bit of flooding in the late winter and early spring. So keep this tip in mind when you start planning your garden and also knowing what kind of things you're going to be dealing with. So first of all, when you're planning the structures of your garden, think of things that are not going to rot, decay, or rust in your garden. One of the reasons why we chose to do raised beds was because our soil, parts of the area, our site for the garden, kind of became flooded a little bit in the winter. Maybe not completely flooded, but the soil was so wet and there was standing water. And so we knew that we wanted to do raised beds to help with drainage. And I absolutely do recommend that if you have a problem with drainage on your garden site, which is more likely going to happen in the PNW than other parts of the nation. I kind of wish we had not done wooden beds, and that's because wood rots. And I wish I had thought about this when I planned my garden. Now, I did choose a natural rough cut cedar, and cedar is one of the longest lasting woods you could ever have. We added a few beds every year, and so our oldest beds are 6 years old, and they are already starting to rot. And now we're having to talk about how we're going to try to patch these together to make them last a little longer, or what are we going to do to replace them? And that's just a lot of work in just 6 years. So keep this in mind. If you're doing an in-ground garden, you don't have to worry as much about maybe the wooden beds, but if you do plan to do a raised garden, maybe consider doing a rust-free like titanium bed that can withstand lots of rain and won't rust or rot on you. Although I don't have any of those here, I am planning to, when I need to replace these, I'm going to be replacing them with some birdies beds. And I really highly recommend them. They are well reviewed and they won't rust. They can last 20 plus years. And so I'm going to include a link down below to Birdie's Beds if that's something you're interested in. They're sold through Epic Gardening, and I am an affiliate with them, so I would make a very small commission off of it. But I do appreciate anyone who will help support our family in any small way. Also think about trellises and things like that you might build out of wood. Maybe see if there's other options that might use something that's a little bit more long lasting. Wood, even the best, even treated lumber, I'm afraid, it just eventually starts rotting in our super wet climate. To help improve airflow among your plants because of how wet sometimes our springs can be, it might be wise to consider trellising a lot of things up. Even like your tomatoes, having them trellised up, keeping leaves off the ground, and just improving that airflow so that hopefully you won't have a lot of powdery mildew issues, which is very common in our area. Powdery mildew is a fungus that spreads via spores, and it can get all over like tomato, squash, cucumber plants. It can be quite destructive. Usually it's only at the end of the season, for me at least, my very late summer when my plants are starting to kind of fade, my summer plants are fading. That's usually when I'll get powdery mildew. So find ways to keep things up off the ground as much as possible. Also worth noting is a lot of fruit trees and berries will end up with fungal issues because of our, sorry, my ducks. Because of our super wet springs and winters, a lot of things that are perennial will end up with fungal problems. And so for instance, my pears and apples in the past had spots on them from fungus. And so the last few years I haven't had to do it, but years past I sprayed them with the copper fungicide in the springtime to help improve the health of the trees. So be aware of that as something that is very common in our wet climate. Number 2 is how to prepare for possibly your worst enemy if you live in the Pacific Northwest, and that is prepare for slugs. When I asked my followers on Instagram what they wish they had known about before they started gardening in the PNW, quite a few of them said, I wish I knew about slugs. Slugs are definitely prolific in this area, and that's because they prefer very moist, wet environments, and that's what we have here in abundance in this climate. They will most likely be your worst invertebrate pest. You may have an issue with deer, rabbits, things like that, those bigger ones that can do a lot of damage in a short period of time. But with proper fencing and barriers, you can oftentimes mitigate those type of pests. But slugs are so insidious because they can just go in all these nooks and crannies, and they hide under bushes and under leaves, and they go under your mulch and in your garden beds. I mean, in my rotting wooden beds, they love tucking into those little crevices where all that rotten wood is, and that's their perfect ideal environment when the days turn really hot. They go into those cool places and they come out at night, and they do most of their destruction at night. I'm not going to go into a lot of details on how to minimize slug damage because I made an entire video on that, and it's right here, so be sure to check that out after you're done with this video. But one thing I will mention is that there's a lot of ways you can set up your garden to try to kind of offset their damage, including like planting plants that are bigger so that they can withstand some slug damage before the slugs completely destroy them. A lot of times I would plant, like for instance this year, I kept trying to plant carrots, and I had a baby in April, and so right after I would plant my carrots, I went and had my baby, came out like a month or two later. My carrots just never were allowed to grow because the slugs just came through and mowed down my little carrot seedlings. So although I love direct sowing, meaning that I plant seeds directly in the ground, some things do need that. Carrots and beets are a great example. But some things like peas, for instance, although I love directly sowing them in the ground, if I do that, as soon as the little shoots come up, those slugs just mow them all down. And so sometimes starting those things indoors and letting the plants get a little bit bigger before you put them outside, the amount of slug damage they get, they are usually able to withstand it and still continue to grow. So that's probably one of my number one tips. Besides, probably your best way to get rid of them is doing some hand picking, which is not fun. I will admit it, it's not fun. I don't like it, but the years that I have done that, I have had the best season with minimal slug damage. This year I've not been able to do that because I had a baby in April, and so the slugs kind of have gotten a little bit out of control. But I do have a new form of pest control, two little buddies that will hopefully do the work for me. Meet Daisy and Lilac. They are my two beautiful runner ducks that I got as ducklings, just a few days old. And if you don't know this about ducks, most ducks prefer and love to eat slugs. Runner ducks in particular are great foragers. They are known for being great slug control. So I just got these girls a couple months ago. They're mostly fully grown now. They're not laying eggs yet, but they are my new pest control for slugs. I've already fed them a few slugs and they absolutely love them. They just gobbled them right up. So hopefully we'll see some improvements in our slug population once I let these girls really start roaming the garden on their own. The last tip I have for you in gardening in the Pacific Northwest is to take advantage of our mild winters. This is the good news when it comes to living in our area, is that our winters are mild enough that a lot of cold hardy vegetables can make it through our winter with very minimal protection, if any at all. So you can really truly grow year round in a lot of these PNW areas. And even better news is that a lot of common garden pests that you deal with in the summer are not present in the winter. So if anything, you actually have better crops. So common pests like aphids that you might get in, say, like your Brussels sprouts won't be an issue in your winter garden. This definitely takes a little planning. You have to prepare ahead of time. So usually in late summer is when you start planning your fall and winter garden. So it takes some planning to, and it's trial and error, honestly, to kind of figure out where's the sweet spot of getting that late summer start so that your plants are grown enough by late fall that once we start getting those cooler temps and we start getting freezing temperatures, your plants are big enough that they can last through the winter. So some examples of this would be like last year I planted some carrots in August. I planted carrot seeds in August and we harvested them in very early spring. I think it was like March-ish time. And we had an amazing carrot harvest, and it was still like the rest of the garden was pretty much barren, except for a few things like that. And all the carrot tops had disintegrated through the winter, but the carrots in the soil were insulated and it protected them. Because we didn't get extremely cold, freezing temperatures where our soil froze, the carrots did wonderfully. Other great ones are like beets and kale and cabbages. All of these, I mean, this is just a very small list. There are so many things that you can plant in your late summer to enjoy in your fall and winter. Definitely make sure that you mulch well around your plants once the temperatures start dropping below 40 degrees at night. This might be the only protection your plants need, but if you do think that you're going to be cold enough and you want to provide them with a little extra protection, then you can think of some other structures. You can do little hoop houses and things like that you can put over your plants to give them just a little bit extra protection. If you want more help in how to plan out your fall and winter garden, check out this video right here. I hope that this video has been helpful for you and that you've learned a few things that you can start applying in your P&W garden, either if you're just beginning or maybe you've been gardening for a few years and you need a little extra help in figuring out how your climate works. If you like what you saw today, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I try to upload videos about once a month. I would love to do more than that, but I am a mom of two busy boys. I just had a baby in April, so my boys keep me very busy. I definitely have a lot of videos on my channel though that you can go through on how to deal with common issues that you may deal with in the garden. Even if you don't live in the P&W, there's still a lot you can find. So with that, I want to say thanks for joining me today and go out and grow something. God bless. Whoa, look at all those.
Big, so big.
Oh, look at this one, it's like 2.
Me too. It's dick, it's